Hello and welcome to PressTv News Analysis. I'm Kaveh Wade. Well, while Hollywood was celebrating its birthday in the United States, Iran is holding the second international conference on Hollywoodism and cinema with foreign scholars from, for example, France, the United States, and Canada. It also included actors, political activists, and documentary filmmakers, not to mention world-famous director Oliver Stone's son, Sean Stone. The event here in Tehran will discuss 5 principal topics, namely narration in Hollywood, the role of cinema in the world awakening, the role of Hollywoodism in human decadence, portrait of future in Hollywood, and Hollywoodism and Zionism, which is what we'll be discussing in this edition of the PressTv News Analysis.
If you make yourself more than just a man.
Home to the good old motion picture and known as the magical place to make dreams come true. But there's a lot more to Hollywood than the glamour of the rich and the famous. The home to great acceptance is also home to outright rejection, as many filmmakers have come to find out. Powerful Washington groups have proven in practice that the thin red lines of Hollywood may not be so thin after all, and they just might be painted in a different color. As many of the filmmakers have very different stories to tell.
The documentaries that go out of many documentaries that has Zionist influence and portrays the Palestinians as villains and the state of Israel as victims, and that there's religious conflict, anti-Semitism. We want the world to know that this is a total misconstruing of the truth.
And while certain topics are simply off the books, media critics say others are rewritten to serve the interests of politicians and lobbyists.
At times of war, it becomes a tool to convince the American people to support the war, and that's what I think is dangerous, and I'm opposing that.
Associations representing Hollywood studios and the pro-Israel lobby are among the powerful Washington groups seeking exemption from a new ethics rule that prohibits federal workers from attending events sponsored by lobbyists and does not allow them to accept social invitations or small gifts from those on K Street. The rule clearly limits Washington's influence on the film industry and quickly drew a strong reaction from AIPAC.
Hollywood is in the throes of degeneracy and decadence. It is a propaganda weapon for aggressive imperialist wars. Everybody can see there's a big Zionist input, there's a British input. The Pentagon has an official office there. They try to promote an outlook of passivity and irrationality so that people can be manipulated and dominated more easily. And they spread that out worldwide.
But young and emerging filmmakers in Hollywood see the light at the end of the tunnel.
I think that the best thing that will happen is there'll be more of an international cinema. I think that because of the amount of money coming in from foreign sales on box office, that really we're going to make movies for an international audience, for mass culture across the world, for people everywhere, not just for Americans.
Hollywood is not so out of this world as its producers may think, and will have to eventually succumb to the demands of a growing audience who want to know more.
Let's find out how Hollywood fares with our guests. Let me introduce them. Editor of MediaChannel.org, Danny Schechter, joins us in the studios. And from the National University, Tom Pollard also joins us in the studio. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, there's a conference being held on this. We're going to get into some of the aims of that conference, but we just looked at this report that was made on Hollywood. I'd like to start by asking you, obviously, Hollywood has influence. No one can argue that. But this report that we saw is very critical of Hollywood and also critical of its stars in some of the segments there. In what ways has Hollywood negatively impacted the world, generally speaking? Danny Schechter, first to you.
Well, first of all, my website is now mediachannel1.org, if anybody's interested. Look, Hollywood is a big business. That's what it's about. It's about finding audiences for films in order to make money for studios, for directors, for stars, and the like. And they try to find topics that are of popular interest. And I think it's a mistake to think of it as a big manipulation machine, only because the audience brings to the theater their own values, their own prejudices, their own interests. And, they don't necessarily come to be, brainwashed. They come to be entertained. And that's really the strength of Hollywood, why it survived for so long, is that it entertains people. There used to be a saying in Hollywood, if you want to send a message, go to Western Union. Don't, put it in a movie. So you do have messages in movies for sure, but you also have a very wide mix of things, including, this year, the Iranian film Separation, which just won a big award at the Golden Globes and has impressed everybody in the movie industry. So, it's not a story that can be dealt with in a reductionist way, narrowly defining everything as kind of having an agenda or a cabal. I think it's much more complicated than that. It's about a cultural industry that is constantly reinventing itself in order to try to make money, and it's not doing such a good job right now. In fact, they're having, problems with box office returns right now, and that's because people get movies now on television, they get them on the internet, they get them on DVD, they get them in lots of different ways. So the old revenue models are no longer working for Hollywood.
Well, Tom Pollard, let's talk about how Hollywood is, in some sense, suppressing some of the, perhaps, local markets in different countries. I mean, obviously, Hollywood has these big budgets that they can surpass in any type of arena in terms of execution, whether it's effects or what have you, or hiring these big movie stars, etc. But at the same time, it's been criticized for suppressing these local markets that perhaps filmmakers cannot then have their films being aired.
Well, I don't see it as suppression, as really depression. They're depressing those markets because of the fact that they offer very attractive entertainment and with these high budgets, and local media can't always compete. And yet I also believe that there's a vital role for local media in the marketplace, and I think that talented directors can and often do rise in popularity, and independent films can come up and compete with the big budget Hollywood blockbusters.
Danny Schechter, you talked about how Hollywood has entertained people, but I'd like to really dig in deeper, given the fact that they have done this for so long and they do draw the people. They have the power, therefore, to influence people, whether it's style, whether it's culture, whether it's whatever.
There's no question that Hollywood influences people, and some of the values that it projects, violence, for example, in certain action movies, or, have a negative impact. There's been a lot of complaints from parents about, the quality of movies, but it's also true that there's a higher standard in many films these days, which they need in order to be competitive. I mean, one of the big, films up for Oscar consideration, Hugo, by Martin Scorsese, is a, children's story set in, in France. It's about the earliest days of the movie industry. I don't think it's projecting negative values. It's actually quite inspiring, which is why it was nominated. The other film, The Artist, which is up for Oscar consideration, is a sort of salute to the old days of silent movies and the like. I think there are values that are negative. There are forces in the movie industry that are sort of basically trying to make a quick buck, no question about it. The values are, but there are also a lot of people working in Hollywood that are trying to do the right thing. And there's a whole new progressive awards that's being created as an antidote or a supplement to the Oscars, honoring progressive films that raise important issues, of which there are many now as well.
Right, but one of the things that they've been criticized, Tom Pollard, about is this stereotyping. And let's mention, for example, the images of Muslims. We see that time and again. whether it's an Arab Muslim, no matter from which country, but Muslims in general seem to be stereotyped into the ones that are perhaps negatively, let's just say. Maybe you can give us some examples of that and why that is portrayed as such. And I'm not citing every movie made in Hollywood that does that.
Well, Hollywood is, stereotypes are kind of the business of Hollywood in a way, because they're offering entertainment, and so if they go beyond the norms and kind of rock the boat, they're not going to get those revenues, and they're not going to be getting that return on their investment. So I'm not in favor of using stereotypes, but I know that's probably why Hollywood uses stereotypes. That's one reason why. I mean, it's undeniable. Another reason is that they rely on a pool of writers and producers and directors, and they tend to reproduce their whatever is popular. And it's like going to the store and finding the items that have been sold out, and you want to buy those items because they're popular.
But does it make it right?
No, it definitely doesn't make it right.
You know, it's not just Muslims. You know, there's been a whole struggle in Hollywood over the years, the representation of people of color, for example, in the United States, opportunities for minority actors, directors, and the like. There's been a battleground to try to get more opportunities for people, more relevant stories, and this is an ongoing tension. And it's also true that when the United States goes to war with a country, there tends to be movies that echo patriotically correct themes, and that often reduces, you know, the people in other countries to you know, the enemy in one way or another. We've seen that in the Vietnam era. We've seen that in Iraq War. We've seen that in many cases. On the other hand, there's also a lot of new documentaries and others pictures getting Oscar consideration that try to promote understanding and tolerance. So it's a mixed bag in a way. On the other hand, there's no question that our cultural environment is also tied to our news media, which tends to echo the themes of Washington policy in many cases, which is negative towards Muslims, negative towards Iran, negative towards people, you know, in other countries whose policies, whose governments we don't like, and so they get treated badly. But you know, when they're making money, we want to be. We want them, you know. Hollywood studios are in China trying to make films there. There's a big film made about Nanjing, Flowers of War, that's been playing in America about the Japanese invasion of China with an American actor and Chinese actors together. So there are these trends that are battling each other for, you know, to challenge the stereotyping that does go on. And it's definitely, you know, valid to critique this and to challenge this, because it does reinforce stereotypes and prejudice in the audience. And when you reinforce prejudice, you encourage, in a sense, hate, you know, and indifference to the needs of others. And this is one of the problems when you have a big, you know, very wealthy industry in a first world country that's often insensitive or not really thinking too much about what's happening to people around the world who are suffering in poverty and struggling for survival.
There's a lot of points that I want to pick up on. Let me pick up on that.
You see, I wasn't just shilling for Hollywood. You know, I'm critical as well, but I see it as part of a cultural environment that we live in. And that cultural environment keeps our consciousness often very low. We don't ask the right questions. There's a lack of critical thinking. And it's proper to discuss all this, but also there's a tendency to sort of looking at the stereotypes and then stereotype Hollywood, you know, in exchange. And that's a bad thing too.
Well, you talked about, for example, you said something to the effect where when a country wants to go to war, for example, there's nationalistic themes perhaps arising in some of the movies. I'm looking at the relationship that exists, for example, between what one of the speakers in that report indicated of between the Pentagon and Hollywood. Now, the Pentagon, obviously, the U.S. Army is portrayed as, and it very well should be in the United States, as a very positive, clean organization. But then when we had instances that have come out throughout the years now, such as Abu Ghraib, such as Guantanamo, such as the torture allegations, which have turned out to be true in many cases. So what is it doing? It has to portray itself in a clean way, but yet you have the realities. It can't portray the realities the way it has transpired, especially since 9/11.
Well, Tom Pollard has written a brilliant book about the Hollywood war machine. Maybe you can talk about it, Tom, because you've studied it.
If you can, briefly.
Sure. Well, and actually, I co-authored this book in 2007, and in this work, I discovered that one reason that the Pentagon has such influence in Hollywood is that if a filmmaker wants to do a combat film or even to have military equipment in their film, they have to go to the Pentagon and they have to ask permission. And the Pentagon is not, they want to look at the whole project and they want to see if is it depicting them in a positive light or not.
Is that a prerequisite?
It is if they, I mean, they don't have to give them permission to use that equipment, and that could mean a lot of money in a budget. And for example, in Apocalypse Now, in Francis Ford Coppola's classic film, he wanted to use helicopters and that sort of thing, but after reading his script, the Pentagon said no. So he had to go to the Philippines and he had to buy other equipment there that wasn't U.S. military. And so they have just that alone gives them a big edge. And I also discovered that some people think that the U.S. decides to go to war and suddenly there are these pro-war films. But what I actually found out throughout history, Hollywood, that the pro-war films come out sometimes 2 or 3 or even 4 years before, or 5 years before the actual decision to go to war occurs. And that happened in World War I, it happened in World War II, Vietnam Wars, and other wars. And the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the pro-war films came and preceded them, and even preceded 9/11, which was the trigger for those other wars. So I think there's something else going on here, rather than a mechanistic view that Hollywood promulgates war. Somehow Hollywood picks up on a pro-war attitude before we even know that it's there.
Okay, so who's coming in on this, Danny
So,
Schechter?
you know, so what I see is a battleground in the United States over culture and politics. The Occupy Wall Street movement, for example, you know, is offering a critical perspective on, you know, on themes in America, economic inequality, that have not been really covered very much in our media. They have been in some films, but really neglected in many others. And, you know, I think what you have now are people becoming a lot more critical of the media, in part because of the growth of the internet, the way in which the internet, you know, has become the principal means of the delivery of information and images. Just recently, Hollywood tried to impose on the American people a stop online piracy law, and you know, they had a lot of senators and congressmen all lined up to support this war, and then the big websites like Wikipedia, Google, Facebook challenged this. You know, there was an internet strike. It was amazing, and the public turned against the law very quickly, and Hollywood is left holding the bag because they thought they had this thing, and they don't have it. So don't, you know, undercut the potential of the people to see through all of this and to find other forms of information and entertainment. I think that's happening. One of the big problems I see today are video games in many cases, which have very, very violent, very strong pro-military themes in them, even more than in Hollywood. But I think challenging Hollywood, discussing Hollywood, debating these issues is very valid. And that's why this conference here in Tehran is important, because obviously they believe that it is important to analyze all of this and to get people thinking critically about media and its role in politics.
Well, you know, it is really important because Hollywood does have a big draw in terms of the pull it has on audiences in numbers, and of course the reflection that people see on the screens is what they emulate in real life, and it could lead to many things. We've seen what happened in different parts of the world. In some respects, the cultural impact that, for example, American culture has had. I mean, the fall of the Shah was partly blamed on that. But let's move on since we have little time. I need to talk about this, and I need to find out your views, Tom Pollard, about the Jewish influence in Hollywood. It's dominated by Jews, from what everyone knows and is well aware of that. Tell us, given what we just talked about in terms of the pull that Hollywood does have, how have they used that to their advantage? What are the pros and cons of having, from the owners of studios to the producers that are picked for television series, is that a good thing, keeping it a Jewish thing when, what, the percentage of the population of the United States is 2%, 3% Jewish? I'm not too sure.
Well, that's an interesting point, and it's often raised, especially at this conference that we've attended. And it's certainly true that Jewish producers and directors do dominate a large segment. I mean, not all of the, of course. I mean, you can think of a lot of fine filmmakers and producers that aren't Jewish, but they do have a disproportionate amount of influence.
I find it kind of offensive, personally, maybe because I am Jewish, but also know that, you know, there's
I meant it in no offense.
No, I'm sure you did. But I'm saying, as a subject, to say that because somebody is Jewish by background or culture, they therefore act as agents of some sort of larger conspiracy, whether it's, you know, a pro-Zionist conspiracy or something else. I think that that's wrong, and I don't think it works that way. Yes, there are a lot of people from different generations who have been affected by this. But by the experience of the Holocaust, for example, that some people here don't think happened. I do think it happened. I think most historians, acknowledge that it's happened. It was one of the crimes of history, not the only one by any means. There have been others, including genocides in the United States against Native Americans. So, this is not, a subject that can be reduced to ethnicity. We have to stay on the level of ideas. What is it about a particular film or about the orientation of somebody that we want to question or we want to challenge? Sly Stallone made the Rambo films. He wasn't Jewish, but he wasn't acting as a non-Jew in making them. He was an actor who had a particularly reactionary point of view. And I think that's what we have to focus on. And I think when we get into this area, it plays to, kind of an association that people have. Oh, it's those people who are doing this. And I think that leads to more prejudice. It's not, proper.
Okay, unfortunately, we've ran out of time. We're going to leave it there. Editor of MediaChannel1.org, Danny Schechter, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And Tom Pollard, thank you so much from the National University. Both of you for joining us in the Capitol here in Tehran in our studios. Of course, you, the viewer, for watching. Any comments, suggestions, idea for a news analysis, do send it to newsroom@presstv.ir. From Mikavet Tahvai and the entire team, it's goodbye.